The Kurds are an Iranian ethnic group in the Middle East. They have historically inhabited the mountainous areas to the south of Lake Van and Lake Urmia, a geographical area collectively referred to as Kurdistan. Most Kurds speak Northern Kurdish or Sorani, which both belong to the Kurdish languages. There are various hypotheses as to predecessor populations of the Kurds, such as the Kardushoy of classical antiquity. The earliest known Kurdish dynasties under Islamic rule are the Hassanwayids, the Marwanids, the Rawadids, the Shaddadids, followed by the Ayyubid dynasty founded by Saladin. The Battle of Chaldiran of 1514 is an important turning point in Kurdish history, marking the alliance of Kurds with the Ottomans. The Sharifnameh of 1597 is the first account of Kurdish history. Kurdish history in the 20th century is marked by a rising sense of Kurdish nationhood focused on the goal of an independent Kurdistan as scheduled by the Treaty of Sèvres in 1920. Partial autonomy was reached by Kurdistan Uaid and by Iraqi Kurdistan, while notably in Turkish Kurdistan, an armed conflict between the Kurdish insurgent groups and Turkish armed forces was ongoing from 1984 to 1999, and the region continues to be unstable with renewed violence flaring up in the 2000s. Name. There are different theories about the origin of the name Kurd. According to one theory, it originates in Middle Persian as Kurd kwrt, a term for nomad, tent dweller. After the Muslim conquest of Persia, this term was adopted into Arabic as Kurd, and was used specifically for nomadic tribes. The ethnonym Kurd may ultimately derive from an ancient toponym in the Upper Tigris Basin. According to the English Orientalist Godfrey Rolls Driver, the term Kurd is related to the Sumerian Karta, which was found in Sumerian clay tablets of the 3rd millennium BC. He wrote in a paper published in 1923 that the term Kurd was not used differently by different nations, and by examining the philological variations of Karta in different languages, such as Korjuani, Gordieni, Kordui, Karjuchi, Karjuani, Kardu, Kurday, Kardaway, he finds that the similarities undoubtedly refer to a common descent. As for the Middle Persian noun kwrt originating in an ancient toponym, it has been argued that it may ultimately reflect a Bronze Age toponym Kardu, Karda, which may also be reflected in the Arabic toponym Gudi. The name would be continued in classical antiquity as the first element in the toponym Korjan, and its inhabitants, mentioned by Xenophon as the tribe of the Kardushoy who opposed the retreat of the 10,000 through the mountains north of Mesopotamia in the 4th century BC. This view is supported by some recent academic sources which have considered Korjan as Proto-Kurdish region. However, some modern scholars reject these connections. Alternatively, kwrt may be a derivation from the name of the Surshii tribe instead. According to some sources, by the 16th century, there seems to develop an ethnic identity designated by the term Kurd among various northwestern Iranian groups, without reference to any specific Iranian language. Kurdish scholar Mehrdad Azadi argues that any nomadic groups called Kurd in medieval Arabic are bona fide ethnic Kurds, and that it is conversely the non-Kurdish groups descended from them who have acquired separate ethnic identities since the end of the medieval period. Sherfson Bidlisi in the 16th century states that there are 4 divisions of Kurds: Kurmanj, Lor, Kalhor, and Guran, each of which speak a different dialect or language variation. Paul notes that the 16th century usage of the term Kurd as recorded by Bidlisi, regardless of linguistic grouping, might still reflect an incipient northwestern Iranian Kurdish ethnic identity uniting the Kurmanj, Kalhor, and Guran. Early history. Kurdish is a language of the northwestern Iranian group which has likely separated from the other dialects of central Iran during the early centuries AD. Kurdish has in turn emerged as a group within northwest Iranian during the medieval period. The Kurdish people are believed to be of heterogeneous origins, both from Iranian-speaking and non-Iranian peoples. Combining a number of earlier tribal or ethnic groups including Lulubi, Gudi, Sirshans, Karduchi. The present state of knowledge about Kurdish allows, at least roughly, drawing the approximate borders of the areas where the main ethnic core of the speakers of the contemporary Kurdish dialects was formed. The most argued hypothesis on the localization of the ethnic territory of the Kurds remains D. N. Mackenzie's theory, proposed in the early 1960s. Developing the ideas of P. Tedesco and regarding the common phonetic isoglosses shared by Kurdish, Persian, and Baluchi, D. N. Mackenzie concluded that the speakers of these 3 languages form a unity within northwestern Iranian. He has tried to reconstruct such a Persian-Kurdish-Baluchi linguistic unity presumably in the central parts of Iran. According to his theory, the Persians occupied the province of Fars in the southwest, the Balochs inhabited the central areas of western Iran, and the Kurds, in the wording of G. Windfor, lived either in northwestern Luristan or in the province of Isfahan, early Kurdish principalities. In the second half of the 10th century there were 5 Kurdish principalities, in the north the Shaddadid and Rawadid in Tabriz and Maragay, in the east the Hassanwayids, the Anazid, and in the west the Marwanid of Diyarbakir. Later in the 12th century, the Kurdish Hazaraspa dynasty established its rule in southern Zagros and Luristan and conquered territories of Kujaluya, Khuzestan and Golpaygan in the 13th century and annexed Shashtar, Hubeidzeh and Basra in the 14th century. One of these dynasties may have been able, during the decades, to impose its supremacy on the others and build a state incorporating the whole Kurdish country if the course of history had not been disrupted by the massive invasions of tribes surging out of the steppes of Central Asia. Having conquered Iran and imposed their yoke on the Caliph of Baghdad, the Seljuk Turks annexed the Kurdish principalities one by one. Around 1150, Ahmad Sanyar, the last of the great Seljuk monarchs, created a province out of these lands and called it Kurdistan. The province of Kurdistan, formed by Sanyar, had as its capital the village Bahar, near ancient Ekbatana. It included the vilayets of Sinjar and Sharazur to the west of the Zagros mountain range and those of Hamadan, Dinawar and Kermanshah to the east of this range. An autochthonous civilization developed around the town of Dinawar, located 75 kilometers northeast of Kermanshah, whose radiance was later only partially replaced by that of Sena, 90 kilometers further north. Marco Polo met Kurds in Mosul on his way to China, and he wrote what he had learned about Kurdistan and the Kurds to enlighten his European contemporaries. The Italian Kurdologist Mirella Galletti sorted these writings which were translated into Kurdish. Ayyubid period. One of the periods where Kurds were at the peak of their power was during the 12th century, when Saladin, who belonged to the Rawadiya branch of the Hatabani tribe, founded the Ayyubid dynasty, under which several Kurdish chieftainships were established. The dynasty ruled areas extending from the Kurdish regions to as far as Egypt and Yemen. Kurdish principalities after the Mongol period. After the Mongol period, Kurds established several independent states or principalities such as Ardalan, Badanan, Baban, Suran, Hakkari, and Badlis. A comprehensive history of these states and their relationship with their neighbors is given in the famous textbook of Sharifnama written by Prince Sharaf al-Din Biltazi in 1597. The most prominent among these was Ardalan, which was established in the early 14th century. The state of Ardalan controlled the territories of Zerdayawa, Kanakin, Kirkuk, Kifri, and Horiman, despite being vassals themselves of the various in Persia-centered succeeding Turkic federations in the region, namely that of the Kara Koyunlu, and the AK Koyunlu specifically. The capital city of this state of Ardalan was first in Sharazur in Iraqi Kurdistan, but was moved to Sina later on. The Ardalan dynasty was allowed to rule the region as vassals by many of the sovereign rulers over the wider territory, until the Qajar monarch Nasser al-Din Shah ended their rule in 1867. Kurdish quarters. In the Middle Ages, in many cities outside of Kurdistan, Kurdish quarters were formed as a result of an influx of Kurdish tribal forces, as well as scholars. In these cities, Kurds often also had mosques, madrasas and other edifices. In Aleppo, the Haret al-Akrad. The city of Aleppo also had Kurdish mosques like al-Zarzari, al-Mairani, al-Bashnawayan. In Baghdad, Darb al-Kurd, recorded since the 11th century. In Barda, Bab al-Akrad recorded in the 10th century. In Cairo, Haret al-Akrad, at al-Maks. In Damascus, Mount Qasun at Rukn al-Din and Souk al-Saruja. Kurdish notables had also built mosques and madrasas by name of al-Mudiyadiyya, Sab al-Majanin, al-Mairani. Some other notables who patronized buildings were Balaku al-Kurdi, Musa al-Kurdi, Habib al-Kurdi. There also was a Kurdish cemetery. In Gaza, Shujaya, named after Shuja al-Din Uthman al-Kurdi, who died in 1239. In Hebron, Haret al-Akrad. Associated with the Ayyubid conquests. In Jerusalem, Haret al-Akrad, thereafter known as Haret esh-Sharaf. Named after a certain Sharaf ad-Din Musa, who died in 1369. The city also had a madrasa by the name of Ribad al-Kurd, built in 1294 by Emir Kurd al-Mansuri. Safavid period. For many centuries, starting in the early modern period with Ismail I, Shah of Safavid Persia, and Ottoman Sultan Selim I, the Kurds came under the suzerainty of the two most powerful empires of the Near East and staunch arch-rivals, the Sunni Ottoman Empire and then the various Shia empires. It started off with the rule of Ismail I, who ruled over all regions that encompass native Kurdish living areas, and far beyond. During the years 1506 to 1510, Yazidis revolted against Ismail I. Their leader, Shir Saram, was defeated and captured in a bloody battle wherein several important officers of Ismail lost their lives. The Kurdish prisoners were put to death with torments worse than which there may not be. In the mid-17th century, the Kurds on the western borders disposed of firearms. According to Tavernier, the mountain people between Nineveh and Isfahan would not sell anything but for gunpowder and bullets. Even so, firearms were incorporated neither wholesale nor wholeheartedly among the Kurds, apparently for the same reasons that hindered their acceptance in Iran proper. In a Persian statistical overview of tribes dating from the period of Shah Sultan Hussein in the early 18th century, it is said that the Kurds of Zafarlo tribe refused to carry the tufang, because they considered it unmanly to do so, as a result of which most continued to fight with lance and sword, and some with arrow and bow. Displacement of the Kurds. Removal of the population from along their borders with the Ottomans in Kurdistan and the Caucasus was of strategic importance to the Safavids. Hundreds of thousands of Kurds were moved to other regions in the Safavid Empire, only to defend the borders there. Hundreds of thousands of other ethnic groups living in the Safavid Empire such as the Armenians, Assyrians, Georgians, Circassians, and Turkomans, were also removed from the border regions and resettled in the interior of Persia, but mainly for other reasons such as socio-economic and bureaucratic ones. During several periods, as the borders moved progressively eastward, with the Ottomans pushing deeper into the Persian domains, entire Kurdish regions of Anatolia were at one point or another exposed to horrific acts of despoliation and deportation. These began under the reign of the Safavid Shah Tahmasp I. Between 1534 and 1535, Tahmasp, using a policy of scorched earth against his Ottoman arch-rivals, began the systematic destruction of the old Kurdish cities and the countryside. When retreating before the Ottoman army, Tahmasp ordered the destruction of crops and settlements of all sizes, driving the inhabitants before him into Azerbaijan, from where they were later transferred permanently, nearly 1,600 kilometers east, into Khorasan. Shah Abbas inherited a state threatened by the Ottomans in the west and the Uzbeks in the northeast. He bought off the former, in order to gain time to defeat the latter, after which he selectively depopulated the Zagros and Caucasus approaches, deporting Kurds, Armenians, Georgians, North Caucasians and others who might, willingly or not, supply, support or be any use in an Ottoman campaign in the region. The magnitude of Safavid scorched earth policy can be glimpsed through the works of the Safavid court historians. One of these, Iskandar Beg Munshi, describing just one episode, writes in the Alam-Ara-yi Abbasi that Shah Abbas, in furthering the scorched earth policy of his predecessors, set upon the country north of the Arashis and west of Urmia, and between Kars and Lake Van, which he commanded to be laid waste and the population of the countryside and the entire towns rounded up and led out of harm's way. Resistance was met with massacres and mutilation, all immovable property, houses, churches, mosques, crops, were destroyed, and the whole horde of prisoners was hurried southeast before the Ottomans should counterattack. Many of these Kurds ended up in Khorasan, but many others were scattered into the Al-Borz Mountains, central Persia, and even Balochistan. They became the nucleus of several modern Kurdish enclaves outside Kurdistan proper, in Iran and Turkmenistan. On one occasion Abbas I is said to have intended to transplant 40,000 Kurds to northern Khorasan but to have succeeded in deporting only 15,000 before his troops were defeated. While the deported Kurds became the nucleus of the modern central Anatolian Kurdish enclave, the Turkmen tribes in Kurdistan eventually assimilated. Massacre of Ganja. According to the early 17th century Armenian historian Erikal Devrizhetsi, the Sunni Kurdish tribe of Jekerlu inhabited the region of Ganja. In 1606, when Shah Abbas reconquered Ganja, he ordered a general massacre of the Jekerlu. Even infants were slaughtered with sharp swords. Battle of Dimdim. There is a well-documented historical account of a long battle in 1609 to 1610 between Kurds and the Safavid Empire. The battle took place around a fortress called Dimdim in Baradost region around Lake Urmia in northwestern Iran. In 1609, the ruined structure was rebuilt by Emir Zon-Lep Serene, ruler of Beredost, who sought to maintain the independence of his expanding principality in the face of both Ottoman and Safavid penetration into the region. Rebuilding Dimdim was considered a move toward independence that could threaten Safavid power in the northwest. Many Kurds, including the rulers of Mukrian, rallied around Emir Khan. After a long and bloody siege led by the Safavid Grand Vizier Hatem Beg, which lasted from November 1609 to the summer of 1610, Dimdim was captured. All the defenders were massacred. Shah Abbas ordered a general massacre in Beredost and Mukrian and resettled the Turkish Afshar tribe in the region while deporting many Kurdish tribes to Khorasan. Although Persian historians depicted the First Battle of Dimdim as a result of Kurdish mutiny or treason, in Kurdish oral traditions, literary works, and histories, it was treated as a struggle of the Kurdish people against foreign domination. In fact, Bedi Dimdim is considered a national epic second only to Mem Circumflex Sin by Ahmad Hani. The first literary account of this battle is written by Fakih Tyran. Ottoman period. When Sultan Selim I, after defeating Shah Ismail I in 1514, annexed western Armenia and Kurdistan, he entrusted the organization of the conquered territories to Idris, the historian, who was a Kurd of Bitlis. He divided the territory into sanyaks or districts, and, making no attempt to interfere with the principle of heredity, installed the local chiefs as governors. He also resettled the rich pastoral country between Erzurum and Yerevan, which had lain in waste since the passage of Timur, with Kurds from the Hakkari and Botan districts. Jambulit Revolt. The Jambulit clan was ruled by local Kurdish feudal lords in the Jabal al-Akrad and Aleppo region for almost a century before the Ottoman conquest of Syria. Their leader, Hussein Jambulitiglu, was appointed as governor of Aleppo in 1604, however he was executed by Segalzaid Shinan Pasha allegedly for his late arrival at the Battle of Urmia. According to Abul Wafa al-Ordi, Jambulit had been murdered because of his Kurdish origins. His nephew, Ali Jambulit, revolted in revenge and declared sovereignty in 1606 and was supported by the Duke of Tuscany, Ferdinand I. He conquered a region stretching from Hama to Adana with 30,000 troops. Grand Vizier, Murad Pasha, marched against him with a large army in 1607. Ali Pasha managed to escape and was later pardoned and appointed governor of province of Temesvar in Hungary. He was eventually executed by Murad Pasha in Belgrade in 1610. Rothiki Revolt. In 1655, Ablukan, the Kurdish Rothiki ruler of Bidlis, formed a private army and fought a full-scale war against the Ottoman troops. Evliya Chaleba noted the presence of many Yazidis in his army. The main reason for this armed insurrection was the discord between Abdul Khan and Melek Ahmad Pasha, the Ottoman governor of Diyarbakir and Abdul Khan. The Ottoman troops marched onto Bidlis and committed atrocities against civilians as they passed through Rothiki territory. Abdul Khan had built great stone redoubts around Bitlis, and also old city walls were defended by a large army of Kurdish infantry armed with muskets. Ottomans attacked the outer defensive perimeter and defeated Rothiki soldiers, then they rushed to loot Bidlis and attacked the civilians. Once the Ottoman force established its camp in Bidlis, in an act of revenge, Abdul Khan made a failed attempt to assassinate Melek Ahmad Pasha. A unit of 20 Kurdish soldiers rode into the tent of Yusuf Kathuda, the second in command, and fought a ferocious battle with his guards. After the fall of Bidlis, 1,400 Kurds continued to resist from the city's old citadel. While most of these surrendered and were given amnesty, 300 of them were massacred by Melek Ahmad, with 70 of them dismembered by sword and cut into pieces. Bedr Khan of Botan. Except for the short Iranian recapture under Nader Shah in the first half of the 18th century, the system of administration introduced by Idris remained unchanged until the close of the Russo-Turkish War of 1828-29. But the Kurds, owing to the remoteness of their country from the capital and the decline of Turkey, had greatly increased in influence and power, and had spread westwards over the country as far as Ankara. After the war with Russia, the Kurds attempted to free themselves from Ottoman control, which resulted in the Bedr Khan clan uprising in 1834. The Ottoman Porte made the decision to then end the autonomous regions of the eastern portion of the empire. This was done by Rashid Pasha, also a Kurd. The principal towns were strongly garrisoned, and many of the Kurd beys were replaced by Turkish governors. A rising under Bedr Khan Bey in 1843 was firmly repressed, and after the Crimean War the Turks strengthened their hold on the country. The modernizing and centralizing efforts of Sultan Mahmud II antagonized Kurdish feudal chiefs. As a result, two powerful Kurdish families rebelled against the Ottomans in 1830. Bedr Khan of Botan rose up in the west of Kurdistan, around Diyarbakir, and Muhammad Pasha of Rawandudz rebelled in the east and established his authority in Mosul and Erbil. At this time, Turkish troops were preoccupied with invading Egyptian troops in Syria and were unable to suppress the revolt. As a result, Bedr Khan extended his authority to Diyarbakir, Shivarik, Baranshir, Sert, Suleymania and Sauj Bulak. He established a Kurdish principality in these regions until 1845. He struck his own coins, and his name was included in Friday sermons. In 1847, the Turkish forces turned their attention toward this area, and defeated Bedr Khan and exiled him to Crete. He was later allowed to return to Damascus, where he lived until his death in 1868. Bedr Khan Beg made two campaigns in 1843 and 1846 against the Assyrian Christians of Hakkari and massacred 50,000 Assyrians in an attempt to Islamize the region. Those Assyrians who met their fate were the mother and the two brothers of the yet-to-be spiritual Assyrian leader Marshaman. Bedr Khan became king when his brother died. His brother's son became very upset over this, which the Turks exploited in tricking him into fighting his uncle. They told him that they would make him king if he killed Bedr Khan. Bedr Khan's nephew brought many Kurdish warriors to attack his uncle's forces. After defeating Bedr Khan's nephew was executed instead of becoming king as the Turks had promised. There are two famous Kurdish songs about this battle, called Izdan Shur and Easy Zelf. After this, there were further revolts in 1850 and 1852. Kurdistan as an administrative entity had a brief and shaky existence of 17 years between December 13, 1847 and 1864, under the initiative of Khoja Mustafa Reset Pasha during the Tanzimat period of the Ottoman Empire. The capital of the province was, at first, Alet, and covered Diyarbakir, Muz, Van, Hakkari, Botan, and Mardin. In the following years, the capital was transferred several times, first from Alet to Van, then to Muz and finally to Diyarbakir. Its area was reduced in 1856 and the province of Kurdistan within the Ottoman Empire was abolished in 1864. Instead, the former provinces of Diyarbakir and Van have been reconstituted. Around 1880, Sheikh Ubaydullah led a revolt aiming at bringing the areas between Lakes Van and Urmia under his own rule. However, Ottoman and Qajar forces succeeded in defeating the revolt. Sheikh Ubaydullah's revolt and Armenians. The Russo-Turkish War of 1877–78 was followed by the uprising of Sheikh Ubaydullah in 1880–1881 to found an independent Kurd principality under the protection of Turkey. The attempt, at first encouraged by the Porte, as a reply to the projected creation of an Armenian state under the suzerainty of Russia, collapsed after Ubaydullah's raid into Persia, when various circumstances led the central government to reassert its supreme authority. Until the Russo-Turkish War of 1828–1829 there had been little hostile feeling between the Kurds and the Armenians, and as late as 1877–1878 the mountaineers of both races had coexisted fairly well together. In 1891, the activity of the Armenian committees induced the Porte to strengthen the position of the Kurds by raising a body of Kurdish irregular cavalry, who were well-armed Hamideh soldiers after the Sultan Abd al-Hamid II. Minor disturbances constantly occurred, and were soon followed by a massacre and rape of Armenians at Sassoon by Kurdish nomads and Ottoman troops. 20th century history. Rise of nationalism. Kurdish nationalism emerged at the end of the 19th century around the same time as Turks and Arabs began to embrace an ethnic sense of identity in place of earlier forms of solidarity such as the idea of Ottoman citizenship or membership of a religious community, or millet. Revolts occurred sporadically but only in 1880 with the uprising led by Sheikh Ubaydullah where demands as an ethnic group or nation made. Ottoman Sultan Abdul Hamid responded by a campaign of integration by co-opting prominent Kurdish opponents to strong Ottoman power with prestigious positions in his government. This strategy appears successful given the loyalty displayed by the Kurdish Hamidiyeh regiments during World War I. The Kurdish ethno-nationalist movement that emerged following World War I and end of the Ottoman Empire was largely reactionary to the changes taking place in mainstream Turkey, primarily radical secularization which the strongly Muslim Kurds abhorred, centralization of authority which threatened the power of local chieftains and Kurdish autonomy, and rampant Turkish nationalism in the new Turkish Republic which obviously threatened to marginalize them. Western powers fighting the Turks also promised the Kurds they would act as guarantors for Kurdish independence, a promise they subsequently broke. One particular organization, the Kurdish Tili Samiye, was central to the forging of a distinct Kurdish identity. It took advantage of period of political liberalization during the Second Constitutional Era of Turkey to transform a renewed interest in Kurdish culture and language into a political nationalist movement based on ethnicity. After World War I, some Kurdish groups sought self-determination and the championing in the Treaty of Sevres of Kurdish autonomy in the aftermath of World War I. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk prevented such a result. Kurds backed by the United Kingdom declared independence in 1927 and established so-called Republic of Ararat. Turkey suppressed Kurdist revolts in 1925, 1930, and 1937–1938, while Iran did the same in the 1920s to Simko Shakak at Lake Urmia and Jafar Sultan of Huraman region, who controlled the region between Marivan and north of Halabja. From 1922 to 1924 in Iraq, a kingdom of Kurdistan existed. When Ba'athist administrators thwarted Kurdish nationalist ambitions in Iraq, war broke out in the 1960s. In 1970 the Kurds rejected limited territorial self-rule within Iraq, demanding larger areas including the oil-rich Kirkuk region. For recent developments see Iraqi Kurdistan. In 1922, an investigation was initiated for Nihad Pasha, the commander of LCEZIR Front, by Adliye Inkimini of Grand National Assembly of Turkey with allegations of fraud. During a confidential convention on the issue on 22 July, a letter of introductions by the Cabinet of Ministers and signed by Mustafa Kemal was read. The text was referring to the region as Kurdistan 3 times and providing Nihad Pasha with full authorities to support the local Kurdish administrations as per the principle of self-determination, in order to gradually establish a local government in the regions inhabited by Kurds. In 1931, Iraqi Kurdish statesman Mahmoud Emin Zeki, while serving as the Minister of the Economy in the first Nuri Assed government, drew the boundaries of Turkish Kurdistan as, with mountains of Ararat and the Dodorjan border to the north, Iranian border to the east, Iraqi border to the south, and to the west, a line drawn from the west of Shivas to Iskenderun. These boundaries are also in accord with those drawn by the Ottomans. In 1932, Garo Sassouni, formerly a prominent figure of Dashnak Armenia, defined the borders of Kurdistan proper as, with a line from the south of Erzincan to Karput, incorporating Dirsum, Sarsankak, and Malatya, including the mountains of Spalai Baraket and reaching the Syrian border, also adding, "These are the broadest boundaries of Kurdistan that can be claimed by Kurds." During the 1920s and 1930s, several large-scale Kurdish revolts took place in this region. The most important ones were the Saiksed Rebellion in 1925, the Ararat Revolt in 1930 and the Dirsum Revolt in 1938. Following these rebellions, the area of Turkish Kurdistan was put under martial law and many Kurds were displaced. Government also encouraged resettlement of Albanians from Kosovo and Assyrians in the region to change the population makeup. These events and measures led to a long-lasting mutual distrust between Ankara and the Kurds. In 1937, during the period of Stalinism, many Kurds in Armenia, along with Kurds in Azerbaijan, became victims of forced migration, and were forcibly deported to Kazakhstan. World War II. During World War II, the Kurds formed 10 companies in the Iraq levies that the British had recruited in Iraq. Kurds supported the British in the defeating the pro-Nazi 1941 Iraqi coup d'état. 25% of the Iraq levies' first parachute company was Kurdish. The parachute company was attached to the Royal Marine Commando and was active in Albania, Italy, Greece, and Cyprus. Kurds participated in the Soviet occupation of northern Iraq in 1941, creating the Persian Corridor, a vital supply line for the USSR. This led to the short-lived formation of the Kurdish Republic of Mahabad. Despite the fact they were a tiny minority in the Soviet Union, Kurds played a significant role in the Soviet war effort. On October 1, 1941, Saman Sayabandov was awarded the Honor Hero of the Soviet Union. Kurds served at Smolensk, Sevastopol, Leningrad, and Stalingrad. Kurds took part in the partisan movement behind German lines. Karasava received both the Hero of the Soviet Union Medal and the Medal Partisan of the Fatherland War for organizing partisans to fight against the Germans in Volhynia Oblast in Ukraine. Kurds took part in the advance into Hungary and the invasion of Japanese-held Manchuria. Post-World War II. Turkey. About half of all Kurds live in Turkey. According to the CIA factbook, they account for 18% of the Turkish population. They are predominantly distributed in the southeastern corner of the country. The best available estimate of the number of persons in Turkey speaking the Kurdish language is about 5 million. About 3,950,000 others speak Northern Kurdish. While population increase suggests that the number of speakers has grown, it is also true that the ban on the use of the language in Turkey was only lifted in 1991 and still exists in most official settings, and that many fewer ethnic Kurds live in the countryside where the language has traditionally been used. The number of speakers is clearly less than the 15 million or so persons who identify themselves as ethnic Kurds. From 1915 to 1918, Kurds struggled to end Ottoman rule over their region. They were encouraged by Woodrow Wilson's support for non-Turkish nationalities of the empire and submitted their claim for independence to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. The Treaty of Sevres stipulated the creation of an autonomous Kurdish state in 1920, but the subsequent Treaty of Lausanne failed to mention Kurds. After the Sheikh Zayed rebellion was suppressed in 1925, Kemal Ataturk established a Reform Council for the East which prepared the Report for Reform in the East, which encouraged the creation of inspectorates generals in the areas comprising a majority Kurdish population. Following, there were established 3 regional inspectorates generals comprising the Kurdish provinces. The inspectorates general were ruled with martial law, and Kurdish notables in the areas were meant to be resettled to the west of Turkey. The inspectorates generals were disestablished in 1952. During the relatively open government of the 1950s, Kurds gained political office and started working within the framework of the Turkish Republic to further their interests, but this move towards integration was halted with the 1960 Turkish coup d'état. The 1970s saw an evolution in Kurdish nationalism as Marxist political thought influenced a new generation of Kurdish nationalists opposed to the local feudal authorities who had been a traditional source of opposition to authority. Eventually they would form the militant separatist PKK, or Kurdistan Workers' Party in English. Following these events, Turkey officially denied the existence of the Kurds or other distinct ethnic groups, and any expression by the Kurds of their ethnic identity was harshly repressed. Until 1991, the use of the Kurdish language, although widespread, was illegal. As a result of reforms inspired by the EU, music, radio and television broadcasts in Kurdish are now allowed, albeit with severe time restrictions. Additionally, education in Kurdish is now permitted, though only in private institutions. As late as 1994, however, Leyla Zana, the first female Kurdish representative in Grand National Assembly of Turkey, was charged with making separatist speeches and sentenced to 15 years in prison. At her inauguration as an MP, she reportedly identified herself as a Kurd. Amnesty International reported that he took the oath of loyalty in Turkish, as required by law, then added in Kurdish, "I shall struggle so that the Kurdish and Turkish peoples may live together in a democratic framework." In response to this, calls for her arrest blaming her of being a separatist and terrorist were heard in the Turkish parliament. The Partiya Karkran Kurdistan, also known as Kadekan Kongrejel, is Kurdish militant organization which has waged an armed struggle against the Turkish state for cultural and political rights and self-determination for the Kurds. Turkey's military allies, the US, the EU, and NATO, see the PKK as a terrorist organization. From 1984 to 1999, the PKK and the Turkish military engaged in open war, and much of the countryside in the southeast was depopulated, with Kurdish civilians moving to local defensible centers such as Diyarbakir, Van, and Sirnak, as well as to the cities of western Turkey and even to Western Europe. The causes of the depopulation included PKK atrocities against Kurdish clans who they could not control, the poverty of the southeast, and the Turkish state's military operations. Human Rights Watch has documented many instances where the Turkish military forcibly destroyed houses and villages. An estimated 3,000 Kurdish villages in Turkey were virtually wiped off the map, representing the displacement of more than 378,000 people. Nelson Mandela refused to accept the Ataturk Peace Award in 1992 because of the oppression of the Kurds, but later accepted the award in 1999. Iraq. Kurds make up around 17% of Iraq's population. They are the majority in at least 3 provinces in northern Iraq which are known as Iraqi Kurdistan. Kurds have also had a presiding majority in Kirkuk, prior to decades of displacement. They still have a presence in Kirkuk, Mosul, Kanakin, and Baghdad. There are around 300,000 Kurds living in the Iraqi capital Baghdad, 50,000 in the city of Mosul and around 100,000 Kurds living elsewhere in southern Iraq. Kurds led by Mustafa Barzani were engaged in heavy fighting against successive Iraqi regimes from 1960 to 1975. In March 1970, Iraq announced a peace plan providing for Kurdish autonomy. The plan was to be implemented in 4 years. However, at the same time, the Iraqi regime started an Arabization program in the oil-rich regions of Kirkuk and Kanakin. The peace agreement did not last long, and in 1974, the Iraqi government began a new offensive against the Kurds. Moreover, in March 1975, Iraq and Iran signed the Algiers Accord, according to which Iran cut supplies to Iraqi Kurds. Iraq started another wave of Arabization by moving Arabs to the oil fields in Kurdistan, particularly those around Kirkuk. Between 1975 and 1978, 200,000 Kurds were deported to other parts of Iraq. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, the regime implemented anti-Kurdish policies and a de facto civil war broke out. Iraq was widely condemned by the international community, but was never seriously punished for oppressive measures such as the mass murder of hundreds of thousands of civilians, the wholesale destruction of thousands of villages and the deportation of thousands of Kurds to southern and central Iraq. The campaign of Iraqi government against Kurds in 1988 was called ANFAL. The ANFAL attacks led to destruction of 2,000 villages and death of between 50 and 100,000 Kurds. After the Kurdish uprising in 1991 led by the PUK and KDP, Iraqi troops recaptured the Kurdish areas and hundreds of thousands of Kurds fled to the borders. To alleviate the situation, a safe haven was established by the Security Council. The autonomous Kurdish area was mainly controlled by the rival parties KDP and PUK. The Kurdish population welcomed the American troops in 2003 by holding celebrations and dancing in the streets. The area controlled by Peshmerga was expanded, and Kurds now have effective control in Kirkuk and parts of Mosul. By the beginning of 2006, the 2 Kurdish areas were merged into one unified region. A series of referendums were scheduled to be held in 2007, to determine the final borders of the Kurdish region. In early June 2010, following a visit to Turkey by one of the PKK leaders, the PKK announced an end to the ceasefire, followed by an air attack on several border villages and rebel positions by the Turkish Air Force. On July 11, 2014, KRG forces seized control of the Bey Hassan and Kirkuk oil fields, prompting a condemnation from Baghdad and a threat of dire consequences if the oil fields were not relinquished back to Iraq's control. The 2017 Kurdistan Region Independence referendum took place on September 25, with 92.73% voting in favor of independence. This triggered a military operation in which the Iraqi government retook control of Kirkuk and surrounding areas, and forced the KRG to annul the referendum. Iran. The Kurdish region of Iran has been a part of the country since ancient times. Nearly all of Kurdistan was part of the Iranian Empire until its western part was lost during the wars against the Ottoman Empire. Following the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, at the Paris conferences in 1919, Tehran demanded various territories including Turkish Kurdistan, Mosul, and even Diyarbakir, but these demands were quickly rejected by Western powers. Instead, the Kurdish area was divided by modern Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. Today, the Kurds inhabit mostly northwestern Iran but also parts of Khorasan, and constitute approximately 7 to 10% of Iran's overall population, compared to 10.6% in 1956 or 8% in 1850. Unlike in other Kurdish-populated countries, there are very strong ethno-linguistical, historical and cultural ties between Kurds and others as Iranian peoples. Some of modern Iranian dynasties like Safavids and Zands are considered to be partly of Kurdish origin. Kurdish literature in all of its forms has been developed within historical Iranian boundaries under strong influence of Persian language. Due to Kurds sharing a common history, very close cultural and linguistic links as well as common origins with the rest of Iran, this is seen as a reason why Kurdish leaders in Iran do not want a separate Kurdish state. The government of Iran has always been implacably opposed to any sign of independence for the Iranian Kurds. During and shortly after the First World War, the government of Iran was ineffective and had very little control over events in the country, and several Kurdish tribal chiefs gained local political power and established large confederations. In the same time, a wave of nationalism from the disintegrating Ottoman Empire has partly influenced some Kurdish chiefs in border region, and they posed as Kurdish nationalist leaders. Prior to this, identity in both countries largely relied upon religion, i.e. Shia Islam in the particular case of Iran. In 19th century Iran, Shia-Sunni animosity and describing Sunni Kurds as Ottoman fifth column was quite frequent. During the late 1910s and early 1920s, tribal revolt led by Kurdish chieftain Simko Shakak swept across Iranian Kurdistan. Although elements of Kurdish nationalism were present in the movement, historians agree they were hardly articulate enough to justify a claim that recognition of Kurdish identity was a major issue in Simko's movement, and he had to rely heavily on conventional tribal motives. Government forces and non-Kurds were not the only ones to have allegedly been attacked. The Kurdish population was also robbed and assaulted. The fighters do not appear to have felt any sense of unity or solidarity with fellow Kurds. Kurdish insurgency and seasonal migrations in the late 1920s, along with long-running tensions between Tehran and Ankara, resulted in border clashes and even military penetrations in both Iranian and Turkish territory. Two regional powers have used Kurdish tribes as tool for own political benefits. Turkey has provided military help and refuge for anti-Iranian Turcophone Shakak rebels in 1918 to 1922, while Iran did the same during Ararat rebellion against Turkey in 1930. The Iranian government's forced detribalization and sedentarization in the 1920s and 1930s resulted in many tribal revolts in Iranian regions such as Azerbaijan, Loristan, and Kurdistan. In particular case of the Kurds, these policies partly contributed to developing revolts among some tribes. As a response to growing pan-Turkism and pan-Arabism in region which were seen as potential threats to the territorial integrity of Iran, pan-Iranist ideology has been developed in the early 1920s. Some of such groups and journals openly advocated Iranian support to the Kurdish opposition against Turkey. Pahlavi dynasty has endorsed Iranian ethnic nationalism, which allegedly seen the Kurds as integral part of the Iranian nation. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi has supposedly praised the Kurds himself as pure Iranians or one of the most noble Iranian peoples. Another significant ideology during this period was Marxism, which arose among Kurds under influence of the USSR. It culminated in the Iran crisis of 1946, which included a bold attempt KDPI and communist groups to try and gain autonomy to establish the Soviet puppet government called Republic of Mahabad. It arose along with Azerbaijan People's Government, another Soviet puppet state. The state itself encompassed a very small territory, including Mahabad and the adjacent cities, unable to incorporate the southern Iranian Kurdistan, which fell inside the Anglo-American zone, and unable to attract the tribes outside Mahabad itself to the nationalist cause. As a result, when the Soviets withdrew from Iran in December 1946, government forces were able to enter Mahabad unopposed when the tribes betrayed the republic. Several Marxist insurgencies continued for decades led by KDPI and Kamala, but those two organizations have never advocated a Kurdish country as did the PKK in Turkey. Still, many dissident leaders, among others Qazi Muhammad and Abdul Rahman Ghasemlu, were executed or assassinated. During Iran-Iraq War, Tehran has provided support for Iraqi-based Kurdish groups like KDP or PUK, along with asylum for 1,400,000 Iraqi refugees, mostly Kurds. Although Kurdish Marxist groups have been marginalized in Iran since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, in 2004 new insurrection has been started by PSHAK, separatist organization affiliated with the Turkey-based PKK and designated as terrorist by Iran, Turkey and the United States. Some analysts claim that the PSHAK does not pose any serious threat to the government of Iran. Ceasefire has been established in September 2011 following the Iranian offensive on PSHAK bases, but several clashes between PSHAK and IRGC took place after it. Since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, accusations of discrimination by Western organizations and of foreign involvement by the Iranian side have become very frequent. Kurds have been well integrated in Iranian political life during the reign of various governments. Kurdish liberal political Karim Sanjabi has served as Minister of Education under Mohammad Mossadegh in 1952. During the reign of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, some members of parliament and high army officers were Kurds, and there was even a Kurdish cabinet minister. During Pahlavi reign, Kurds allegedly received many favors from the authorities, for instance to keep their land after the land reforms of 1962. In the early 2000s, the supposed presence of 30 Kurdish deputies in the 290-strong parliament has allegedly shown that Kurds have a say in Iranian politics. Some of influential Kurdish politicians during recent years include former First Vice President Mohammad Reza Rahimi and Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, mayor of Tehran and second-placed presidential candidate in 2013. Kurdish language is today used more than at any other time since the revolution, including in several newspapers and among school children. Large numbers of Kurds in Iran show no interest in Kurdish nationalism, especially Shia Kurds, and even vigorously reject the idea of autonomy, preferring direct rule from Tehran. Iranian national identity is questioned only in the peripheral Kurdish Sunni regions. Syria. Kurds and other non-Arabs account for 10% of Syria's population, a total of around 1.9 million people. This makes them the largest ethnic minority in the country. They are mostly concentrated in the northeast and the north, but there are also significant Kurdish populations in Aleppo and Damascus. Kurds often speak Kurdish in public, unless all those present do not. Kurdish human rights activists are mistreated and persecuted. No political parties are allowed for any group, Kurdish or otherwise. Techniques used to suppress the ethnic identity of Kurds in Syria include various bans on the use of the Kurdish language, refusal to register children with Kurdish names, the replacement of Kurdish place names with new names in Arabic, the prohibition of businesses that do not have Arabic names, the prohibition of Kurdish private schools, and the prohibition of books and other materials written in Kurdish. Having been denied the right to Syrian nationality, around 300,000 Kurds have been deprived of any social rights, in violation of international law. As a consequence, these Kurds are in effect trapped within Syria. In February 2006, however, sources reported that Syria was now planning to grant these Kurds citizenship. On March 12, 2004, beginning at a stadium in Qamishli, clashes between Kurds and Syrians broke out and continued over a number of days. At least 30 people were killed and more than 160 injured. The unrest spread to other Kurdish inhabited towns along the northern border with Turkey, and then to Damascus and Aleppo. Armenia. Between the 1920s and 1990s, Armenia was a part of the Soviet Union, within which Kurds, like other ethnic groups, had the status of a protected minority. Armenian Kurds were permitted their own state-sponsored newspaper, radio broadcasts and cultural events. During the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, many non-Yazidis and Kurds were forced to leave their homes. Following the end of the Soviet Union, Kurds in Armenia were stripped of their cultural privileges and most fled to Russia or Western Europe. Recently introduced electoral system of the Armenian National Assembly reserves one seat in the parliament to the representative of the Kurdish minority. Republic of Azerbaijan. In 1920, two Kurdish inhabited areas of Juanshur and eastern Zangezur were combined to form the Kurdistan Okrug. The period of existence of the Kurdish administration was brief and did not last beyond 1929. Kurds subsequently faced many repressive measures, including deportations. As a result of the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, many Kurdish areas have been destroyed and more than 150,000 Kurds have been deported by the Armenian forces since 1988. Kurds in Jordan, Syria, Egypt, and Lebanon. The Kurdish leader Saladin, along with his uncles Emir Adil and Emir Shirko, were joined by Kurdish fighters from the cities of Tigrit, Mosul, Erbil and Shir Azur in a drive toward Sham in order to protect Islamic lands against Crusader attack. The Kurdish king and his uncles ruled North Iraq, Jordan, Syria and Egypt for a short period. Salah el-Din in Syria, Emir Shirko in Egypt and Emir Adil in Jordan, with family members ruling most of the cities of today's Iraq. The Kurds built many monumental castles in the lands which they ruled, especially in what was called Kurdistan of Syria and in Damascus, the capital of Syria. A tall building, called Kala, is still standing, in the mid-southwest quarter of Damascus. The Ayyubian dynasty continued there for many years, all from Kurdish descent. Genetics. Although the Kurds came under the successive dominion of various conquerors, including the Armenians, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Ottoman Turks, Sassanid Persians, and Achaemenid Persians, they may have remained relatively unmixed by the influx of invaders, because of their protected and inhospitable mountainous homeland. Similarity to Europeans and peoples of the Caucasus. A study by Richards and colleagues of mitochondrial DNA in the Near East found that Kurds, Azerbaijanis, Ossetians and Armenians show a high incidence of MNU5 lineages, which are common among Europeans, although rare elsewhere in the Near East. The sample of Kurds in this study came from northwest Iran and northeast Iraq, where Kurds usually predominate. A geographically broad study of the Southwest and Central Asian corridor found that populations located west of the Indus Valley mainly harbor MTNs of Western Eurasian origin. When Ivan Nasids and his colleagues examined both mitochondrial and Y chromosome DNA, they found Kurdish groups most similar genetically to other West Asian groups, and most distant from Central Asian groups, for both MTN and the Y chromosome. However, Kurdish groups show a closer relationship with European groups than with Caucasian groups based on MTN, but the opposite based on the Y chromosome, indicating some differences in their maternal and paternal histories. Similarity to Azerbaijanis of Iran. According to DRB1, DQA1 and DQB1 allele frequencies showed a strong genetic tie between Kurds and Azerbaijanis of Iran. According to the current results, present-day Kurds and Azerbaijanis of Iran seem to belong to a common genetic pool. Similarity to Georgian people. David Comas and colleagues found that mitochondrial sequence pools in Georgians and Kurds are very similar, despite their different linguistic and prehistoric backgrounds. Both populations present MTN lineages that clearly belong to the Western Eurasian gene pool. Similarity to Jewish people. In 2001, Nebula et al. Compared 3 Jewish and 3 non-Jewish groups from the Middle East, Ashkenazim, Sephardim, and Kurdish Jews from Israel, Muslim Arabs from Israel and the Palestinian Authority area, Bedouin from the Negev, and Muslim Kurds. They concluded that Kurdish and Sephardi Jews were indistinguishable from one another, whereas both differed slightly, yet noticeably, from Ashkenazi Jews. Nebel et al. Had earlier found a large genetic relationship between Jews and Palestinian Arabs, but in this study found an even higher relationship of Jews with Iraqi Kurds. They conclude that the common genetic background shared by Jews and other Middle Eastern groups predates the division of Middle Easterners into different ethnic groups. Nebel et al. Also found that the Cohen modal haplotype, considered the most definitive Jewish haplotype, was found among 10.1% of Kurdish Jews, 7.6% of Ashkenazim, 6.4% of Sephardim, 2.1% of Palestinian Arabs, and 1.1% of Kurds. The Cohen modal haplotype and the most frequent Kurdish haplotype were the same on 5 markers and very close on the other marker. The most frequent Kurdish haplotype was shared by 9.5% of Kurds, 2.6% of Sephardim, 2.0% of Kurdish Jews, 1.4% of Palestinian Arabs, and 1.3% of Ashkenazim. The general conclusion is that these similarities result mostly from the sharing of ancient genetic patterns, and not from more recent admixture between the groups.